I want you to meet someone. I'll call her Margaret. She was 71, lived by herself in a small townhouse outside Cleveland after her husband Frank passed. Her 2 daughters called on Sundays, when they remembered. Her doctor noticed her blood work start to drift about 2 years after Frank's funeral. Inflammation slightly up. More colds each winter than the one before. Then one March, a flu turned into pneumonia and put her in the hospital for 9 days. Pause. Her doctor sat down on the edge of the bed and said quietly, "Margaret, I think you might be lonely." And she said, almost insulted, "I'm not lonely. I'm just by myself." There is a difference, and what the research now suggests, from teams at UCLA and a large meta-analysis led by Julianne Holt-Lundstad, is that her body had known the difference for about 18 months before she did. We're talking about a shift in immune function of roughly 20 to 30%, depending on the marker. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you what that actually means inside your body, and 4 small weekly habits the research keeps coming back to. Not vague advice, measurable. You'll know on Sunday night whether you did them. And there's one finding in here that almost nobody expects. Margaret isn't one specific person. She's a composite of people I've read about and people clinicians I trust have described to me over the years. But almost everyone over 60 watching this knows a Margaret. Maybe in your family, maybe in the mirror on the hard days. I've spent years reading the immunology and psychiatry literature on social connection. What I want to do today is translate that work into plain English. Not give you another lecture about staying social. Because get out more is not a plan. It's the kind of advice that makes lonely people feel worse. Quick note before we go deeper, and I'll only say this once. This is educational content, not medical advice. If you have an existing condition, are on medications, or anything I describe sounds like your situation, please bring it to your own doctor. They know you. I don't. Here's the part I want you to hold on to. The research suggests it isn't the amount of contact that moves the needle on immune markers in older adults. It's something more specific. I'll come back to that in a moment. One last thing about Margaret. Her doctor didn't tell her to get out more. He told her to pick one person and one time every week, and to call it her standing call. She picked her younger daughter, Sunday, at 4. 12 months later, her CRP, that inflammation marker we talked about, was back in the normal range. One thing, one person, one time, every week. That isn't every patient's story, but it's enough patient stories that the researchers are paying attention. Let's get one thing clear first. When researchers say loneliness lowers immunity, they don't mean you'll catch every cold that walks past you. They mean something more specific and, honestly, more interesting. A research team, led by Dr. Steve Cole at UCLA, looked at gene expression in the white blood cells of older adults who scored high on loneliness scales. White blood cells, by the way, are the part of your immune system that fights infection. Think of them as the patrol officers of your bloodstream. What he found, and what other groups have replicated, is a pattern they nicknamed GTRA, a conserved transcriptional response to adversity. In plain English, in chronically lonely people, the genes that drive inflammation tend to get turned up, and the genes that fight viruses tend to get turned down. That's why public health bodies, including a recent advisory from the U.S. Surgeon General, have compared the long-term health impact of chronic loneliness to smoking. Not as a scare tactic, but because the inflammatory footprint looks similar over years. Here's the part most people miss. It isn't being alone that drives this. It's feeling alone. You can live with a spouse, see family weekly, and still register the same pattern if those interactions feel hollow. And this is the counterintuitive part. You can live by yourself, see 2 people a week, and not register it at all, as long as those 2 contacts feel real and predictable. So the question isn't, how many people do I see? It's what is the rhythm of meaningful contact in my week? That distinction is what the 4 habits are built on, seen. It's Sunday at 4 p.m. Every Sunday at 4 p.m., your phone rings. It's the same person. It's been the same person for 3 months. You don't have to wonder if they'll call. They will. Mechanism. This is the part the research keeps pointing back to. A predictable, recurring social contact appears to do something a sporadic one doesn't. Why? Because part of what loneliness does to the nervous system is keep it in a low-grade, scan for threat state. A kind of background hum, where the body never fully relaxes. Predictable contact lowers that hum. Studies measuring cortisol, the body's main stress hormone, suggest that scheduled, expected social events soften the cortisol curve over the day. A surprising one. In research comparing different kinds of contact, short-scheduled calls often outperform longer unscheduled visits on emotional measures. The reason researchers give is simple. You stop wondering whether the connection is still there. Action. 3 steps you can do this week. 1. Pick 1 person, not 5. A sibling, an old friend, a grandchild, a former colleague. Quality of relationship matters less than your willingness to keep it. 2. Set a fixed slot, same day, same time. 20 minutes is the minimum researchers tend to discuss, long enough for the conversation to leave small talk, short enough that neither of you dreads it. 3. Tell them it's a standing thing. Don't leave it to chance. I'd love to make this our Sunday at 4 is enough. The structure is the medicine. Transition. Now, there's a second habit, and this one surprises almost everyone, because for a long time, researchers thought it was just a nice-to-have. Turns out it's something else. Seen. It's Wednesday evening. You're eating dinner. On the other side of the table, or on a tablet propped against a fruit bowl. There is another person, maybe a friend, maybe a grown child, maybe a neighbor. You're not putting on a show. You're just eating and talking and being there. Mechanism. Eating with another person does something that doesn't quite happen anywhere else. The act of sharing food triggers what some researchers call co-regulation. Your nervous systems quietly sync up. Heart rate slows, breathing slows. Digestion improves because the body shifts from alert mode into rest and digest mode. Beyond that, observational research from groups studying so-called blue zones, regions like Sardinia and Okinawa, where people tend to live longer in good health, keeps surfacing the same finding. Meals taken with others are the rule, not the exception. The researchers aren't claiming the meal alone explains longevity. They're saying it's one of the most repeatable patterns. Here's the contrarian piece. A video call dinner counts. Studies on shared meals don't require physical proximity to show benefit on mood and reported well-being. If your closest people live far away, this is the workaround. Action. What measurable looks like for this one. Aim for 2 shared meals a week, not 7. 2. Anything beyond that is a bonus, not a requirement. One of them should be in person if you can manage it. The second can be over video. The trick is you both actually eat, not just talk. If you live alone and have no one obvious to share with, and a lot of people in this audience are in that situation. Community options work surprisingly well. Senior centers, religious community meals, free public library lunches in many cities. The structure of showing up to eat lowers the social pressure compared to showing up to chat. Transition, quick check-in before we get to the third habit. If what we've covered so far is useful, the gene expression piece, the anchor call, the shared meal, then subscribing is genuinely the easiest way to support this channel and helps me keep making these. That's the only time I'll ask in this video. Back to the topic. Scene. It's Friday morning. You bring a plate of something over to your neighbors. You spend 10 minutes at the door. You drive a friend to their appointment. You read for an hour at the local library's children's program. This is a category of action with a name in the research literature. Prosocial behavior. It just means doing something small that benefits someone other than yourself. Mechanism. Here's where it gets interesting for the immune story. Studies looking at older volunteers, for example, work coming out of researchers, tracking adults engaged in regular volunteer activity, have shown lower levels of one inflammation marker called C-reactive protein, or CRP. CRP is one of the markers doctors look at on blood panels to estimate how much background inflammation your body is running. Why might helping someone shift a blood marker? The leading explanation has to do with what researchers call purpose-related stress modulation. When you're useful to someone, your brain's stress response appears to recalibrate. A meta-analysis published in JAMA Psychiatry linked higher self-reported sense of purpose in older adults to lower all-cause mortality risk. And here's the part I find most striking. The benefit doesn't scale linearly with effort. Researchers consistently find that small, repeated acts of helping appear to do as much for well-being markers as large, dramatic ones. Sometimes more, because they're sustainable. 5 minutes of being useful every few days beats 2 hours of volunteering once a quarter. Action. Pick something small and repeatable. Option 1. A single weekly act of help in your neighborhood. Bringing in someone's mail, walking a dog, cooking double and dropping off the spare portion. Option 2. A once-a-week volunteer slot. 2 hours, somewhere local. Libraries, hospitals, community gardens, food banks. Almost all of them are short-staffed and would welcome you. Option 3. And this one's underrated. Share a skill. If you spent 40 years doing something well, somebody younger needs that. Mentoring programs for new tradespeople, retired engineer programs, school reading volunteers. The point isn't grandeur. The point is regularity. Transition. One more habit, and this is the one I'd save for last on purpose. Because it's the one almost everyone over 65 living alone is missing. And it's the one with maybe the most direct biological evidence behind it. Scene. Your daughter hugs you at the door before she leaves. Your friend at the coffee shop pats your shoulder. You hold your grandchild's hand for 10 seconds. You scratch behind your dog's ear for a full minute. These are not the same thing. And biologically, that matters less than you might think. Mechanism. Physical touch, even brief, friendly, non-romantic touch, releases a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin is sometimes nicknamed the bonding hormone. But in adults, it does something more practical. It appears to lower cortisol, slow heart rate, and modestly reduce blood pressure for hours after the contact ends. Here is the part that gets missed. Research on older adults living alone consistently shows that physical touch is the single most undermet social need. Not conversation, not activity, touch. The clinical name for going long stretches without it is touch starvation or skin hunger, and it correlates with higher reported anxiety and worse sleep. The hopeful peace. Research suggests pet ownership counts. Petting a dog or cat appears to produce similar oxytocin and cortisol changes to friendly human touch in adults living alone. So does receiving a professional massage. So does a simple handshake held a second longer than usual. This is the habit I'd want you to think about most carefully if you live by yourself. Action. Aim for at least 3 moments of friendly touch per week. That can be hugs from family, a held handshake with a friend, a deliberate 10-minute session of petting a pet, or a monthly massage at a community wellness clinic. If you don't have family nearby and don't have a pet, community options exist. Many faith communities offer hugs and hand-holding routinely. Tai Chi and group exercise classes for older adults often involve gentle, friendly contact built into the practice. Dance classes, ballroom, line dancing, are sometimes prescribed in geriatric clinics for exactly this reason. Transition. Before we close, I want to ask you something. Of these 4, the anchor call, the shared meal, the small service, the touch minimum, which one is hardest for you to do? Not for someone else, for you specifically. Right now. Drop a number in the comments. I read them, and I'll respond to as many as I can. So, let me put this together for you, because 4 habits is exactly enough to be useful, and just enough that you might forget one. The research keeps coming back to a single idea. The body responds less to how many people are in your life, and more to whether your week has a reliable rhythm of meaningful contact. That rhythm appears to shift inflammation, stress hormones, and immune cell behavior in measurable ways. Here is your week, ranked from easiest to start to hardest. Pick the first one you don't already do. Step 1, easiest. Send the text today. To one person. Propose a standing 20-minute call, same day, same time, starting this week. Don't wait until you feel like it. The point is the schedule. Step 2. Pick 2 days this week for a shared meal. 1 in person if you can. 1 over video if you have to. Step 3. Add a friendly touch each day. A hug at the door, a pet on your lap for 10 minutes. A held handshake at church. Aim for 3 deliberate moments by Sunday. Step 4. Hardest, biggest payoff. Find 1 small recurring way to be useful to someone outside your household. Friday morning neighbor's mail, 10 minutes, or a Wednesday afternoon volunteer slot, 2 hours, somewhere local. If you do those 4, you will have done in 1 ordinary week what the research community keeps pointing to as the closest thing to a measurable lifestyle dose response for chronic loneliness in adults over 65. One more thing to sit with before we end. The data here is not about being busy. It is not about being popular. It is about the quiet, repeatable presence of a few people who know you and a few small acts of mattering to someone. That is what your immune system, near as we can tell, is listening for. One last question for the comments. Who in your life right now would say yes if you proposed a weekly call? Don't tell me their name. Just hold them in mind for a second. Take care of yourself this week. I'll see you in the next one.